What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved comedic actors finds himself in a live television confrontation that spirals so far out of control he has no choice but to walk off set? The answer is more complex and revealing than you might think. Before we dive into this incredible moment, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and drop a comment below telling me what you think really pushed things over the edge. Now, let's get into what actually happened on the Today's Show. Ben Stiller arrived at the studio that morning expecting a standard promotional interview. These things usually follow a comfortable rhythm. A few laughs, some stories about the new project, maybe a blooper or two, and everyone goes home happy. But from the moment he sat down across from the host, something felt different. The energy was off. You could sense it even through the screen. The interview started innocuously enough. The host opened with a smile, welcoming Ben to the show and congratulating him on his latest project. Ben responded with his typical charm, cracking a joke about the early call time and how he still wasn't fully awake. The audience laughed. Everything seemed normal. But then came the first question, and you could immediately tell this wasn't going to be the light, breezy conversation everyone anticipated. The host leaned forward slightly and said, quote, "So Ben, there's been a lot of talk lately about some of your older films and whether certain jokes would be acceptable by today's standards. Do you ever look back and cringe at some of the choices you made?" Ben's smile faltered for just a moment. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Well, I think context matters a lot," he replied. "Comedy evolves, society evolves. I'm proud of the work I've done, but I also understand that we're always learning and growing. I don't think it's productive to go back and judge everything through a modern lens without considering the time and place it was created." The host nodded, but there was something in the expression that suggested this answer wasn't quite what they wanted. They pressed further. "But don't you think artists have a responsibility to acknowledge when they've made mistakes? Some people feel hurt by content that was created without considering their perspective." Ben shifted in his seat. "I think there's a difference between acknowledging impact and retroactively condemning yourself for things that were considered acceptable at the time," he said, his tone becoming slightly firmer. "I care deeply about not hurting people. But I also think we have to be careful about applying current standards to past work in a way that erases all nuance." The host's eyebrows raised slightly. "So, you don't feel any regret about those choices?" "That's not what I said," Ben responded. And now there was a clear edge in his voice. "I said context matters. I can acknowledge that times have changed while also standing by the fact that I was making comedy that reflected the sensibilities of that era. I've grown. Everyone has grown. But I'm not going to sit here and apologize for my entire body of work." The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. You could see it in Ben's body language, the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way his hands gripped the armrest just a bit more firmly. The host, rather than easing off, seemed to sense blood in the water. "Let's talk about your recent comments regarding the industry," the host continued. "You've been pretty vocal about certain issues. Some people have called you hypocritical given your position of privilege. How do you respond to that?" Ben let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Hypocritical? How exactly? Because I have an opinion? Because I've been successful? I'm not sure I follow the logic there." "Well, you've criticized certain aspects of the business while continuing to benefit from that same system," the host explained. "People are wondering if you're really committed to change or just performative." And now Ben's expression hardened completely. "Performative," he repeated slowly. "That's an interesting accusation to make during what's supposed to be a promotional interview. Are you genuinely interested in my perspective, or is this some kind of gotcha moment you've been planning?" The host maintained their composure, but you could sense the shift happening. "I'm asking legitimate questions that I think our audience wants to hear answered," they said smoothly. "Are you though?" Ben shot back. "Because it feels like you've decided what my answers should be, and you're frustrated that I'm not giving them to you. I came here to talk about my work, not to be cross-examined about every opinion I've ever expressed." "Your work is connected to these larger conversations," the host countered. "You can't separate the art from the artist." "I'm not trying to separate anything," Ben said, his voice rising slightly. "But there's a way to have these discussions that's respectful and productive, and this isn't it. You're not interested in dialogue. You're interested in making me look bad." The audience had gone completely silent. The camera operators didn't know where to focus. This was live television going completely off the rails in real time. "I think you're being defensive," the host said. And that was clearly the wrong thing to say. "Defensive? Ben repeated, leaning forward. Now, you've spent the last 10 minutes implying I'm a bad person, questioning my integrity, and suggesting I'm some kind of fraud, and you think defensive is the problem here. The host straightened up, clearly not expecting Ben to push back so forcefully. I'm not implying you're a bad person, they said, though the damage was already done. I'm asking you to engage with criticism that exists in the public sphere. Ben shook his head slowly. No, you're not. You're framing everything I say in the worst possible light. There's a difference between engaging with criticism and walking into an ambush. And right now, this feels a lot like an ambush. I think you're overreacting, the host replied. And you could see several crew members in the background exchange worried glances. These are conversations that need to happen. Then have them, Ben said sharply. Have them honestly. Have them with actual curiosity instead of this prosecutorial approach. Do you know what the problem is? The problem is that you've already decided who I am and what I represent, and nothing I say here is going to change that because you're not actually listening. The host opened their mouth to respond, but Ben wasn't finished. You asked me about growth and evolution, right? Well, here's something I've learned. Real conversations about difficult topics require good faith from both sides. They require a willingness to hear perspectives that might challenge your own assumptions. What they don't require is someone sitting across from you with a list of grievances disguised as questions. I have to push back on that, the host interjected. These aren't grievances. They're legitimate concerns that your producers decided would make good television, Ben interrupted. Let's be honest about what this is. You booked me to talk about my project, but somewhere along the line, someone decided it would be more interesting to try and take me down a peg. And maybe that plays well with certain audiences, but it's not journalism, and it's not fair. The host's expression shifted from controlled professionalism to something harder. You're a public figure, Ben. You don't get to control the narrative. You don't get to dictate how people perceive your actions or your words. I'm not trying to control anything, Ben responded, his voice steady but intense. I'm trying to have a conversation with someone who seems more interested in scoring points than actually understanding anything. And I have to tell you, this is exactly what's wrong with how we talk about complex issues. Now, everything has to be reduced to the simplest possible terms. Everyone has to be either completely right or completely wrong. There's no room for nuance, no room for growth, no room for anything that doesn't fit into a predetermined narrative. So, you're the victim here, the host said, and there was an unmistakable note of sarcasm in their voice. Ben's eyes narrowed. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I express frustration with how this conversation is going, and you immediately frame it as me claiming victimhood. It's a rhetorical trick. It's designed to shut down any legitimate criticism of your approach by making me look like I'm whining about accountability. You are whining, the host shot back, and several audience members gasped audibly. You came on this show, you agreed to an interview, and now you're upset because you're being asked questions you don't like. The air in the studio was electric now. This had crossed from uncomfortable television into something entirely different. Ben sat back in his chair, and for a moment he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the space. Do you know what's interesting about this moment? He asked. We're live, right? Millions of people are watching this happen in real time. And I think they can see exactly what's going on here. I think they can see that I came here in good faith, ready to have a conversation. And instead, I'm being treated like I'm on trial. And I think they can also see that the more I try to engage honestly, the more you twist my words. I'm not twisting anything, the host protested. I'm holding you accountable. Accountable for what exactly? Ben demanded. For having a career? For making comedy? For having opinions that don't perfectly align with whatever position you've decided is correct? This isn't accountability. This is performance. You're performing for the audience, showing them how tough you are, how willing you are to go after someone with a platform. But there's nothing brave about this. There's nothing righteous about trying to humiliate someone on live television. No one's trying to humiliate you, the host said, though their tone suggested otherwise. Really? Ben asked. Because from where I'm sitting, that's exactly what this is. You've created a situation where anything I say can and will be used against me. If I defend myself, I'm defensive. If I try to explain context, I'm making excuses. If I push back on your framing, I'm refusing to take responsibility. It's a no-win scenario, and you know it. The host leaned back, crossing their arms. Maybe if you stopped focusing on how the questions are being asked and actually answered them, we wouldn't be having this problem. I've answered every single question you've asked, Ben said firmly. You just don't like the answers. And that's fine. You don't have to like them. But don't sit there and pretend this is about me dodging accountability, when what's really happening is that I'm not giving you the sound bites you want. What sound bites would those be? The host challenged. An apology, Ben said bluntly. A mea culpa. Some kind of admission that I'm everything you've implied I am. That's what this whole interview has been designed to extract. And I'm not going to do it. Not because I think I'm perfect or above criticism, but because I refuse to participate in this kind of bad faith theater. The host's face flushed slightly, whether from anger or embarrassment was hard to tell. Bad faith theater? That's quite an accusation to make on live television. Is it an accusation if it's demonstrably true? Ben countered. Let's look at what's actually happened here. You started with a loaded question about my old work framed in a way that suggested I should be ashamed of it. When I tried to provide context, you accused me of making excuses. You then pivoted to calling me hypocritical without providing any specific examples. And when I called out your approach, you told me I was being defensive and whining. At what point in this process was there room for an actual conversation? The host uncrossed their arms, sitting forward again. You know what I think? I think you're used to interviews where everyone treats you with kid gloves, where people laugh at your jokes and tell you how great you are, and the moment someone actually challenges you, you fall apart. That's not a challenge, Ben said, his voice rising. A challenge would be a tough but fair question asked with genuine curiosity about my perspective. What you're doing is something else entirely. You're not trying to understand anything. You're trying to win. Win what? The host asked with a bitter laugh. This isn't a competition. Isn't it? Ben shot back. Because it certainly feels like you're keeping score. Every time I try to explain something, you're already preparing your next attack. You're not processing what I'm saying. You're just waiting for your turn to talk. That's not an interview. That's a debate. And I didn't sign up for a debate. Maybe you should have, the host said coldly. Maybe if you spent less time in your bubble and more time engaging with people who disagree with you, you'd be better prepared for conversations like this. Ben stared at them for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something closer to disappointment. You really believe that, don't you? You think you're doing something important here. You think you're speaking truth to power, or holding me accountable, or whatever other justification makes this feel noble to you. I am holding you accountable, the host insisted. No, Ben said quietly. You're grandstanding. There's a difference. Accountability is about helping people understand impact and encouraging growth. What you're doing is public shaming dressed up as journalism. And the worst part is you probably can't even see the distinction anymore. The host's expression hardened. I don't need you to lecture me about journalism. Clearly, someone needs to, Ben responded. And now there was steel in his voice. Because what you're doing right now is corrosive. It's not just bad for me. It's bad for everyone watching. You're teaching people that the goal of conversation is to destroy the other person, to find their weakest point and exploit it, to never give an inch, never show empathy, never try to understand where someone else is coming from. Is that really the world you want to create? Don't turn this around on me, the host said sharply. You're the one who walked in here with an attitude. I walked in here expecting a professional interview, Ben corrected. What I got was an interrogation. And yes, I have an attitude about that because I think it's wrong. I think it's damaging. And I think it reflects a broader problem with how we engage with each other in this culture. Oh, here we go, the host said with obvious disdain. The culture lecture from the wealthy Hollywood actor. And there it is, Ben said almost triumphantly. The moment when you stop even pretending to engage with the argument and just go for the personal attack. Wealthy Hollywood actor. As if that somehow invalidates everything I'm saying. As if my professional success means I don't get to have opinions about how people treat each other. Your professional success means you have a platform, the host countered. And what you're doing with that platform right now is complaining about being asked hard questions. They're not hard questions, Ben said, his frustration evident. They're hostile questions. There's a massive difference. A hard question is one that requires thought and self-reflection. A hostile question is one designed to make the person answering look bad no matter what they say. And you've been asking the latter while pretending they're the former. The host shook their head. I fundamentally disagree with your characterization of this interview. Of course you do, Ben replied. Because admitting that your approach has been unfair would require the kind of self-reflection you're demanding from me. And we can't have that, can we? The rules only apply one way. You're being ridiculous, the host said dismissively. Am I? Ben challenged. Let me ask you something. When you prepared for this interview, did you think about what you wanted to learn from me? Did you have any curiosity about my perspective, my experiences, my thoughts? Or did you just make a list of things you could nail me on? The host hesitated just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Ben saw it and pressed forward. That's what I thought. This was never about learning anything. It was about performing righteousness. And you know what the really sad thing is? There are legitimate conversations to be had about all the topics you've brought up. About how comedy ages, about privilege in the industry, about accountability and growth. But we're not having any of those conversations because you're more interested in looking tough than in actually engaging with ideas. I'm engaging just fine, the host said defensively. No, you're reacting, Ben corrected. There's a difference. Engaging requires listening. It requires considering that the person across from you might have a point, even if you don't agree with everything they say. But you've made it clear that you've already decided I'm wrong about everything. So, what's the point of continuing this? The point is that you committed to doing this interview, the host said firmly. Under false pretenses, apparently, Ben replied. I was told this would be a conversation about my work. Instead, it's become a referendum on my character, and I'm done participating in it. The words hung in the air for a moment. I'm done participating in it. The studio went completely silent. Even the host seemed momentarily stunned, as if they hadn't quite expected Ben to actually draw that line. You can't just leave, the host finally said, and there was an edge of panic in their voice. Watch me, Ben said simply, and he started to remove his microphone. The host's eyes widened. Ben, come on. Don't be dramatic. We're having a conversation. No, Ben said, carefully unclipping the mic from his collar. You're having a performance. I'm removing myself from it. There's a difference. This is incredibly unprofessional, the host said, and you could hear the desperation creeping in. You're walking out on a live interview. Ben paused, holding the microphone in his hand, and looked directly at the host. You want to talk about unprofessional? Let's talk about it. It's unprofessional to ambush a guest with a completely different agenda than what was discussed. It's unprofessional to treat someone with contempt when they're giving you their time. It's unprofessional to turn an interview into a trial. So, yes, I'm walking out and I'm doing it because staying would mean endorsing this kind of behavior, and I won't do that. You're making a huge mistake, the host warned. People are going to see this as you running away from accountability. Let them, Ben said with a shrug. I'd rather be seen as someone who walks away from a bad situation than someone who sits there and takes abuse in the name of being polite. And that's what this has been. Abuse dressed up as accountability. I'm not interested in playing that game anymore. So that's it, the host asked, standing up now. You're just going to run? I'm not running, Ben corrected, also standing. I'm making a choice. I'm choosing not to participate in something I find fundamentally dishonest. And I think anyone watching this can understand why. You've spent the last 20 minutes trying to make me into a villain. And when that didn't work, you got frustrated. This isn't about me at all. It's about you needing to prove something, and I refuse to be your prop. The host's face was red now, whether from anger or embarrassment. You're proving my point, they said sharply. You can't handle criticism. I can handle criticism just fine, Ben replied calmly. What I can't handle, what I won't handle, is bad faith. And that's all this has been from the start. You didn't invite me here to have a conversation. You invited me here to be a target. And I'm declining to play that role. This is going to look terrible for you, the host said. A last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. Maybe, Ben acknowledged. Or maybe people will watch this and understand exactly why I left. Maybe they'll see what I see, which is someone who's more interested in gotcha moments than genuine dialogue. Either way, I can live with my choice. Can you live with yours? The host opened their mouth, but no words came out. In that moment of silence, Ben placed the microphone on the chair and started walking toward the edge of the set. The cameras followed him, unsure of what else to do. This was uncharted territory for live television. Ben, the host called after him. One final attempt. Come on, let's reset. We can start over. Ben stopped and turned back. And for a moment, it looked like he might reconsider, but then he shook his head. No, we can't, because the problem isn't what's been said. It's the entire framework of how you approach this. You can't reset that. You can't undo the fact that you came into this with an agenda that had nothing to do with good faith communication. And honestly, I think the audience deserves better than watching us pretend to have a civil conversation after everything that just happened. So you're really doing this? The host said, and now they sounded more defeated than angry. I really am, Ben confirmed. And I hope that at some point you'll think about why. I hope you'll consider whether what you're doing actually serves any purpose beyond satisfying your own need to feel morally superior. Because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? Not accountability, not justice, not even good television. It was about you getting to be the person who took down Ben Stiller. And I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in helping you write that story. You're insufferable, the host muttered loud enough for the microphones to pick up. Ben actually smiled at that, though there was no warmth in it. And you're exactly what's wrong with how we talk about difficult subjects in this country. We agreed to disagree. Goodbye. And with that, he walked off the set. The cameras stayed on the host, who stood there looking completely lost, clearly having no idea how to recover from what had just happened. The audience sat in stunned silence. Producers could be heard frantically talking in the background, trying to figure out how to fill the remaining time. It was chaos, pure and simple. The host eventually sat back down, attempting to compose themselves. Well, the host said, their voice shaky. That was unexpected. We're going to take a quick break. But the damage was done. The interview that was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance had turned into something else entirely. A confrontation about the nature of public discourse, about accountability versus performance, about the line between tough questioning and hostility. And Ben Stiller had decided that line had been crossed. What made this moment so significant wasn't just that a celebrity walked out of an interview. That's happened before. What made it significant was how it happened and why. Ben didn't storm off in anger. He didn't lose his temper or say something he'd regret. He made a conscious, deliberate choice to remove himself from a situation he felt was fundamentally wrong. And he articulated exactly why he was doing it, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The question now is what this means for how we conduct these conversations going forward. Does Ben's walkout represent a refusal to engage with legitimate criticism, as the host suggested, or does it represent a necessary pushback against a media culture that often prioritizes conflict over understanding? The answer probably depends on who you ask and what you believe about the nature of accountability in public life. What's undeniable is that something shifted in that studio. A line was drawn. And whether you think Ben was right or wrong to walk out, you have to admit he made his position clear. He wasn't going to participate in what he saw as bad faith theater. Consequences be damned. And in an era where so much of public life feels performative, where everyone seems to be playing a role rather than engaging authentically, there's something almost refreshing about someone just saying enough and walking away. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more breakdowns of moments like this and comment below with your answer to this question. Do you think Ben was justified in walking out, or should he have stayed and continued the interview? Let me know what you think.